It is Sunday, the 29th of April, 2018. I'm in front of the Unitarian Church of Montreal. I'm just starting up my protest against Unitarian Universalist clergy abuse and various other Unitarian Universalist injustices, abuses, and hypocrisy. And since it happens to be Child Abuse Prevention Month, at least in the United States and perhaps North America, this month's protests have been concentrating on Unitarian Universalist child abuse, and more specifically Unitarian Universalist cover-up and denial of clergy abuse of children, to say nothing of abuse of children by Unitarian Universalist Sunday school teachers and ordinary Unitarian Universalist lay people. So basically, I've been protesting against the sexual abuse of children by Unitarian Universalist ministers for quite some time now. My protest against rape committed by Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell and attempts to conceal that by Unitarian Universalists go back to the late 1990s, early 2000s. But as I became more and more aware of other cases, well, I spoke about those other cases as well. And I will say that there's actually a fair number of cases that I don't speak about. And the reason I don't speak about them is because I'm not able to prove beyond doubt that that these things actually happen. There's a fair number of what would be described as unsubstantiated rumors about child abuse, child sex abuse committed by Unitarian Universalist ministers and Unitarian Universalist lay people. But because the church does such a good job at covering up and hiding things, sometimes it's difficult to substantiate these unsubstantiated rumors, even if they are true. So I stick to talking about cases where child abuse has been substantiated beyond reasonable doubt in a court of law as a rule. But sometimes you don't need a court of law to prove beyond reasonable doubt that child abuse has occurred. The cases that I do talk about are the Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell case, which is a case of a Unitarian Universalist minister in Massachusetts going to India and telling the parents of teenage Tibetan refugees that if he takes their daughters into his care, if they hand over their daughters to him, he will take their daughters back to America and provide them a, in quotation marks, a better life in America. Essentially, he would be the guardian of their daughters. He would take care of their daughters. He would ensure they got a good education. He might have even promised that he would get United States citizenship for them. So in any case, one of these teenage Tibetan refugees who Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell brought back to America after persuading her parents to hand her over to him was repeatedly raped over a period measured in years by Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell. And these rapes included what was described as unnatural rape in court documents, newspaper reports. And there were some lurid details. I'm not going to go into the lurid details because, my concern is not just the child sex abuse itself. And let's face it, a 16-year-old, particularly a vulnerable teenage Tibetan refugee, is a child. When Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell started raping this girl when she was 16 years old, she was a child. Anyway, getting back to things, like I said, I'm not going to go into all the lurid details. If you want to find them, you can run appropriate Google searches, but you won't find a lot of stuff anyway. A lot of it's being buried and so on. But it's out there. I mean, if you wanted to, I guess you could obtain the actual court documents. That would take some time and effort and cost some money. But if you got the court documents, you'd probably learn some of the details of what happened. You can also research the old newspaper reports that are not available online. You'd have to, find out, which newspaper reported what and when, and try to get copies of the original newspaper reports. But in any case, to make a long story short, Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell's victim, one of them anyway, because there were some others from the sound of things, she finally ran away, got away from him, I believe in her early 20s. So he basically repeatedly raped her, sexually exploited her over a period measured in at least 4 years. She ran away, and then she reported Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell's sexual exploitation, rape. Sexual exploitation is sort of being polite about it. And anyway, she reported this to some of the church leaders, I believe board members. And based on newspaper reports, there was what would appear to have been an attempt by the Unitarian Universalist Association to silence this victim by having her enter into a confidentiality agreement. It was very common for the Unitarian Universalist Association to pretty much insist that anyone who wanted to bring any kind of misconduct complaint against a Unitarian Universalist minister, at least any sexual misconduct complaint, had to sign a confidentiality agreement before they would even do anything. It looks like there was an attempt to do this. And so it could be seen as an attempt to silence the vulnerable teenage Tibetan refugee who had been repeatedly raped over a period measured in years. And again, this is from a newspaper report. This is a reasonable interpretation of something that was reported in a newspaper, so it's credible. It's also credible in the sense that I've been told by people who know about these things that it was very common for the Unitarian Universalist Association to, more or less force people to sign confidentiality agreements when they brought clergy sexual misconduct complaints to the attention of the Unitarian Universalist Association. So what happened, however, is that the church leaders to whom this, by that time, young woman had reported Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell's rapes, they decided that the best thing to do was to report the allegations to the police and let the police investigate it and decide what to do about it. And that's what they did. So they went to the police. I believe one of them was related to a police officer. So I have reason to believe that at least one of these church leaders had a police officer in the family. And so in any case, the rapes were reported, and Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell was charged, tried, and convicted of the forcible rape of this teenage Tibetan refugee, who I will not name for the time being. I know her name, but for the time being, I'll keep her name quiet. You can find out what it is if you want. If you go on the internet and search, Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell, Tibetan refugee, rape, whatever, you'll find out what her name is if you want to know what her name is. In any case, so he was charged, tried, convicted, sentenced to an 8-year jail term, of which he served only 4. So when you think about it, he got about a year in jail for every year that he raped this vulnerable teenage Tibetan refugee. Seems like a pretty inadequate sentence to me. Certainly an inadequate amount of time in jail. And I believe he's still alive and out there in the United States. Haven't heard of his demise yet. Then there's other Unitarian Universalist ministers who have been charged, tried, and convicted of what can be properly described as pedophilia, sexual abuse of preteen children. However, their names are difficult to determine. There are credible news reports available publicly about them, but they are not actually named in the news reports. The cities, and note the plural there, the cities where they come from are identified, but not even their specific churches are identified in the news reports. So you have to do a bit of sleuth work to figure out, which congregation these pedophile Unitarian Universalist ministers minister to. And then, of course, you would have to do additional detective work to determine, well, which of the ministers of this particular congregation is or are the ones responsible for sexual abuse of children. But it can be done, and I'm sure it has been done. It obviously was done when the legal system got involved. You can be sure the police did the detective work. You can be sure the prosecutor also knew all the details, to say nothing of the judge and possibly jury in these cases. But in terms of publicly available information in news reports, it seems, at least in terms of those that are available on the internet, because again, there may well be, and in fact I know for a fact that there are newspaper reports, from the time, but these newspaper reports aren't available on the internet. They're from the 1980s, 1990s, before the internet came into existence, or certainly before it became a fairly popular public source of information. So a lot of these are archived newspaper articles. You could find them in libraries and certain databases and so on. But whoops-a-daisy. Just got a little distracted there by the dog. In any case, like I said, it's possible to research, and I can assure you I've done a certain amount of research. You can go to, as I said, newspaper databases. You can find these in libraries. University libraries are especially good for that kind of thing. And you can find out, at least what was available in the news. And if you wanted to do the extra detective work, well, you could theoretically get the court documents and so on. So what it comes down to in any case is that Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell was not the only Unitarian Universalist minister to sexually abused children. And there are, in fact, a certain number of Unitarian Universalist ministers who sexually abused children who were significantly younger than 16 years of old, who were basically preteen children. I've even heard of an unsubstantiated rumor. I'll talk about the unsubstantiated rumor. In other words, I cannot prove that this happened, but I've been told about it. So it's maybe it happened, maybe it didn't. But what I have been told by a person is that this person knew of a female Unitarian Universalist minister who was a pedophile Unitarian Universalist minister, and who was even interested in what this person described as infants. So again, this could be false. This could be, somebody just, saying something untrue to perhaps embarrass the church or whatever. But I didn't get that impression from the person. They seemed quite sincere. They didn't seem to have any obvious, motives for this. So I tend to think that, possibly they exaggerated a little bit, but that it's likely that they were correct in the basics. What's that? Let's see, thank you. It's actually Child Abuse Prevention Month. It's coming to an end. Thank you. Yeah. Let's see, thanks. So, that was passerby who's basically encouraging my protest against Unitarian Universalist sexual abuse of children, and also non-sexual abuse. You know, this month I'm talking about also non-sexual abuse, because there is non-sexual abuse of children. But the main point here is that there are members of the public who see my protest and basically approve of it and express their approval. Not everyone who sees my protest expresses their approval or disapproval, for that matter, but the fact of the matter is that the overwhelming majority of people who do express their approval or disapproval express approval. I would say at least 8 out of 10, and more like 9 out of 10 people who react to my protest in one way or another react in a positive and supportive manner that is comparable to what just happened. And that's one of the reasons why I have the camera running all the time. It's not the only reason. Other reasons to keep the camera running are to record any assaults on me by Montreal Unitarians. It happens. There are other bad behavior of Montreal Unitarians. It's also to protect myself from false accusations brought against me by Montreal Unitarians, because I've had a certain number of false accusations brought against me by Montreal Unitarians, where they try to get me arrested on bullshit criminal charges to shut down my protest. And it's nice to be able to show some video. Good day, sir.
Really?
Really?
How do you figure?
Well, I got a cease and desist demand letter falsely accusing me of violating Canada's blasphemy law by the lawyer representing the Unitarian Universalist Association in Boston. So I'm living proof that Unitarians...
How did that happen?
Because I blogged about some cases of pedophilia and rape committed by Unitarian Universalist ministers.